Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about stupid nationalist conductor profiling as a preview to our Classics Today Insider special video of Eugen Jochum's 10 best recordings, which I know you're all going to want to see. So if you're not an insider subscriber at Classics Today, do please sign up. There's a link below this video where you could do it, or renew if your subscription has expired, and I'll see you all over there. But in the meantime, we're going to discuss this amazing phenomenon. Now, what is stupid nationalist conductor profiling? Well, we just have had, the reason this is coming to mind is because we've had quite a few examples of it recently. Really quite a few. The most recent, possibly, was the Klaus Mäkelä, or somebody criticized my Finnish pronunciation, so now I'm going to really do it wrong. Anyway, Klaus Mäkelä's Sibelius cycle. Why did he do a Sibelius cycle? It really sucked. He did a Sibelius cycle because he's Finnish, and Finnish people just do Sibelius. That's all. They just do Sibelius constantly. They wake up, they do Sibelius, they hum Sibelius, they make love thinking of Sibelius. That's all Finnish people do because they're Finnish. I would be insulted if I were Finnish and someone told me that. But the fact of the matter is we have, at the moment, a tremendous crop of Finnish conductors, largely because of Sibelius, by the way. And they're running around, everyone assumes, doing Sibelius. I really hope that a lot of them don't like Sibelius. I was in Denmark a while back and talking to one of the guys who was a supervising manager at Hansen Edition. And we were talking about Nielsen stuff. And he said, I really don't like Nielsen very much. And I said, good for you. You don't have to. Why is there any reason that you have to? Or that you have a specific ability to do this stuff especially well? That's what makes the thing so crazy. The same situation came up very recently in a video I did just a few days ago talking about Seiji Ozawa's German Masterworks box. He had to go back to Japan before someone gave him a Brahms cycle or a Beethoven cycle, because he never did it in Boston. Recorded it, that is. We're talking about recordings now. Always recordings, not what people do in concert, which is very, very different. Because in concert, people have to play that stuff, and they do. Whether they do it well or not is another issue. But, because he was Japanese, and because his specialties were French music or contemporary music or Takemitsu or, stuff that most people didn't especially care about, he didn't have an opportunity to do that music. But the fact of the matter is that when he did Brahms with the Saito Keenan Orchestra, that was him coming home, because Brahms was his meat and potatoes. Mr. Saito was a huge Brahms guy, and that's what he taught and trained his pupils to love and revere. And the fact is, Ozawa was a pretty good Brahms conductor. He always was. But he only had an opportunity to do a complete cycle when he went back to Japan. And when Boston had a chance to do a complete cycle, who did they do it with on Phillips? Haitink. Remember? There is a Haitink Brahms cycle in Boston, made when Ozawa was still there. And, why? What was going on there, one might ask, that Ozawa couldn't have done it? And it's really quite striking. But no, he was judged because of where he came from and who he was. And now, let's be clear. I really understand that there's marketing and PR involved here, and that you have to go with the flow, as it were. Most conductors will be perfectly happy doing the stuff that their agents tell them they have to do, because that's who they are, theoretically. And most of them will just get along just fine and have nice careers doing that. If they're French, they do French music. If they're Italian, they do opera. If they're this, they do, it goes on and on. But then you have the question of what happens in countries that don't have, composers. or that don't have a musical tradition that has a distinctive particular quality. I get it. I mean, American conductors, they're supposed to do Copland and Bernstein and Gershwin, and they're absolutely American composers. And that is a wonderful style. And it's frankly as good as any other national style. But you can't make a respectable career, especially in Europe, doing just American stuff. You have to be able to do the other stuff as well. And, when somebody breaks through and does the other stuff, then it's like a big deal. Bernstein was a big deal because he did Beethoven. Toscanini was the biggest of all because he was an Italian opera conductor who did Brahms and Beethoven and Wagner. And everybody adored his Brahms and Beethoven and Wagner. That was a big deal. But for the most part, we are content to let others make these decisions for us without thinking about what we're missing. But there are glimpses. That's the point. There are glimpses and gleams of what we're missing. For example, think about Pierre Monteux. Pierre Monteux played Brahms string quartets for Brahms. His favorite composer was Brahms. He desperately wanted to do Brahms, but he was only allowed to do a single Brahms symphony in a commercial recording, and that was number 2. And that's really crazy. Charles Munch, who came from Strasbourg and who really spoke German and who was the concertmaster of the Leipzig Gewandhaus under Furtwängler and Bruno Walter, he never completed a Brahms cycle or a Beethoven cycle. And it's really striking when you think about it, how that worked out. And the success of the things that conductors like Munch and Monteux did do really makes you wonder what might have been had they been given their opportunity to do the music that they felt strongly about. Munch was also a big Bach guy. I mean, he really was. Now, Munch did plenty of music he felt strongly about. And so did Monteux. So I'm not saying that they were denied careers. I mean, they were revered. But they were major figures who had other interests other than the usual stuff that was expected of them. And that to me is kind of, that's the price we pay for the kind of classical music market that we have. A lot of it has nothing to do. You have to remember this. This is the essential point. It has nothing to do with how good or bad they may be or how excellent the recordings may sound, because no one is going to take the time to actually listen and decide and say, oh, this is really great. We should do more because they're fabulous at this. Or ask them and say, who do you really want to do? Who are you most identified with? And I think that's sort of a shame because I know that we've, for all the millions of great recordings we have, I mean, I'm not complaining about that. We've lost still more because these artists didn't have the opportunity to give us what they regarded as their very best work. Now, some of them might be delusional. Their very best work might be just terrible. I mean, we don't know. It's very much a case of individual opportunity, and you have to look at it all on an individual basis and not jump to conclusions. But I really do think that this nationalistic bullshit, which really, frankly, is a European phenomenon. I mean, it really is. I know America has its problems, but that is not one of them. I mean, it really isn't, not in the same way. And this Russian conductors that have to do Russian music. There are so many crappy Russian conductors out there in Russian music, and they may do other things better. Why shouldn't people have the opportunity to do what they do best if we acknowledge their excellence as artists generally? I mean, if they've earned the right to make recordings, to be in front of a major orchestra, to do all this stuff, let them play what they want to play. And let us learn if it's, or decide whether it's great music making or not. Some people are completely unself-critical and narcissistic, and they think everything they do is wonderful, and those people you can't trust. But we would learn which ones we could trust pretty quickly, I dare say. So, what does any of this have to do with Eugen Jochum? Well, everybody knows that Eugen Jochum is the Bruckner guy, and he was a fabulous Bruckner conductor. He really, really was a great Bruckner conductor, just a terrific at it. But he actually said, was quoted as saying that, everybody wants me to do Bruckner, but that's not who is closest to my heart. And that will come as a shock to many people for whom Jochum's Bruckner is the Bruckner. And he does Bruckner fabulously. Why? Because he's a fabulous musician. And certainly he felt something for that music too. The fact that he likes something else better doesn't mean he doesn't do the other, isn't sincere in his Bruckner recordings. He's incredibly sincere. But he said he grew up doing, loving Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, and heaven knows and Brahms, he had the opportunity, thank God, to make recordings of all of those people. He did 3 Beethoven cycles. So, 2 Brahms cycles. And his Bach is, the greatest Bach out there before the period instrument movement cranked in and, did their own thing. They're not remotely comparable to each other. It's just great Bach. But the question is, as a result of these stereotypes, as a result of pigeonholing Jochum as the Bruckner guy, people did not pay much attention to his Brahms or his Beethoven or his Bach, even though it was admired in his lifetime, some of it, sometimes tremendously so. He still never had the reputation that I think he deserved as a conductor in that particular repertoire. And it's easy to understand why not, because not only was he doing it, but every other German conductor out there was doing it. And he was very much the third conductor, the third wheel in Deutsche Grammophon, because you had Karajan, first of all, first and foremost, who did all of that stuff, except for Bach, of course, which he even did, even though it was like vile and repulsive, but he did it. And then you had Karl Böhm, who was doing all of that stuff as well. And then sort of somewhere around there, patching up and filling in the gaps, and, was Eugen Jochum, a nice, sweet, genial guy who just happened to be better at that stuff than either of the other guys as often as not. He was really tremendous. And he did great Bruckner. But also, Jochum did quite a bit of contemporary music. He was bashing the Bavarian Radio Symphony into great shape so that Kubelik could waltz in and take it over. And that's kind of the story of his career. He was always second to somebody else, probably because he was just a decent human being. But, he rebuilt that orchestra, the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, and then Kubelik took over and went on to be Kubelik in the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra. But it was Jochum who built them up initially. And the Concertgebouw is another case in point. After Edward von Beinum died very suddenly, it was generally thought that Haitink was too young to be the sole conductor of the Concertgebouw. And so they brought in Jochum to be co-conductor with Haitink. Well, that lasted for about 3 or 4 years. But in that period of time, Jochum did a complete Beethoven cycle because they didn't trust Haitink to do it. And the orchestra hadn't done one since Mengelberg's day. So, yeah, Jochum got the Beethoven cycle, and Haitink, in a snit, went and did it with the London Philharmonic. Very poorly, actually. And then only came back later with the Concertgebouw to do Beethoven. It's very, very interesting how these things work out politically. But Jochum got the Beethoven cycle because he was playing actually sort of second fiddle. His consolation prize was the Beethoven cycle because he wasn't going to get the orchestra. It had to go to a Dutch guy because they were Dutch and Haitink was Dutch. And so that's the reason. It wasn't because Haitink was a better conductor than Jochum. He certainly was not. It was because he was Dutch. And that's how that stuff happens. And music, as always, I like to say, takes second place to the real question of why these people get what they get and do what they do. And we are very lucky that so many of them are so good at so many different things, because what we're hearing is not necessarily what they would have wanted us to hear in all circumstances. And I just think it's very, very interesting. I know quite a few conductors. I've known them, let's put it that way, and I've spoken to many about just this issue, where I say, if you had the opportunity to do anything that you wanted to do Absolutely anything. Who do you feel closest to? Who do you feel, you can best represent to the public? And sometimes the answers are very surprising. They really, really are. And I just find it fascinating. And I think that the whole way that the business is set up, which is to sell people based on name recognition or country of birth, or never what the music sounds like. Never, ever. And it never will be. And the reason it never will be is because music takes time. It takes time. People have to take the time to listen to it. You can't sell, records are the most fascinating example of that, recordings, because you sell recordings based on everything other than what the recording sounds like, because you don't get a chance to hear most of it before you buy it. So you're taking it on faith that what's inside there is going to be what they say it's going to be and that it's going to be good. So when you're selling a product that is essentially unknown other than the name and the title, you have to turn to other things to sell the product, to convince people that they know what they're getting. And so Eugen Jochum became the Bruckner guy. And when he passed away, and when his reputation was somewhat in decline, and everything was out of print, Bruckner was in print. And so what was left became even more closely identified with him. So he was really, really the Bruckner guy. But now that all this stuff is out in boxes, and his entire discography is rather conveniently packaged, it's in two big, Deutsche Grammophon boxes and a couple, Warner boxes, and some Eloquence boxes for the Philips Decca stuff. I mean, you basically got him in 4 or 5 boxes, other than some other, strange things that popped up on Orfeo or Vox even, or some other stuff. But basically that's where his legacy lays. It's very easy to hear and judge and see that what we were told, or what we were led to believe, or what was presented to us as the essence of Eugen Jochum was in fact simply the product of catalog management by the labels, and had nothing to do with what he was really great at. And what I propose to do in my little chat on Jochum's 10 Best Recordings is tell you what he was really great at. And there was quite a bit. He was quite the conductor. So I do hope that you will join me over at ClassicsToday.com to see what his 10 best recordings are and why I call them that. So keep on listening, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.